Come, let us explore the 8th verse of the Great Garuda in Flight, a Dzogchen classic. This root text was composed many centuries ago by the great Buddhist reformer Vajra of Odhanaya, a region that is now known as the Swat Valley of modern-day Pakistan. Let us relaxingly recite. Without existing, it is not non-existent. Inner reality manifests as an absence. Emptiness is not empty, it abides in the dimension of emptiness. Awareness arises from the nature of the open space. Without even wishing for it, one attains the bliss that is already free from any activity. So that could sound like pseudo-spiritual word salad. So I'll do my best to explain it. So in order to do that, I'm going to shift to what's it called? There's a fancy word. It eludes me. It's a diagram that helps to teach. What's that called? Anyway. So we're going to explore mindfulness, meditation, and emptiness. And now those things have been confused for a very long time, and I find that nothing cuts through that confusion quite like neuroscience. So that's my in, so to speak. What if mindfulness was just a fancy way of describing noticing? Every time we inhale, the sympathetic aspect of our autonomic nervous system, which is ensconced within the middle third of our spinal cord, has evolved to vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice mind's antics of perception, emotion, intention, cognition, recollection, and imagination. So what that means is instead of actively picking and choosing what to focus on, we're doing the opposite. We are randomly, vulnerably, passively noticing whatever fleetingly pops up, like a game of whack-a-mole at Chuck E. Cheese. And so, since this is not the rigidity of concentration, but the flexibility, vulnerability of merely noticing, nothing is off limits. From the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. Well, that's great, but what do we do with all that stuff that we notice? That brings us to meditation, which is just a fancy way of referring to physical relaxation as well as mental release. You see, every time we inhale, the parasympathetic aspect of our autonomic nervous system, which is divided between the lower third and the upper third of that same spinal cord, supports the our physical relaxation and mental release to such a degree that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could literally and fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, and even less defining. But humans on every populated continent are wired not just to think literally, but to think figuratively. It is the complexity of our central nervous system is predicated on the tendency to think figuratively. In fact, it has been posited by some, it has been argued by some, that we learn to think figuratively before we thought literally. Literal thinking depends on language. Figurative thinking does not. It is therefore older than language. For instance, imagine our distant ancestors at the bottom of the Precambrian Sea, and we were perhaps looking for food. And I'm using sensory terms very loosely here. We are searching for food, questing for food, if you will. And so we might remember where we found food the last time, and we might imagine finding food there again. And that is the roots of figurative thinking or symbolic thinking. Now, those who communicate with simile or metaphor are notorious for being sloppy and are easily destroyed in high school debate. But we ignore the power of figurative communication, even self-communication, to our great disadvantage. So when we look at this figuratively, every time we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could feel as if it was as non-graspable as a vast empty void. Now, any good English teacher will remind us that a simile is only as useful as it is relatable, so we have to ask the question, what? What is a real-world example of a non-graspable vast empty void? How about the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could be tantalizing to the eye, is non-graspable to the hand? So all emptiness is nothing mystical that requires blind faith. It is not something magical. It requires a PhD. It's just a figure of speech. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation, regardless of how solid and permanent and defining it might have seemed, as we relax into our exhalation, that same thing feels as non-graspable as a beautifully blue sky. This is not a question of belief, it's just a figure of speech. Let's return to the root text. Without existing, it is not non-existent, and in reality manifests as an absence. So this is a rather fun way or playful way of saying let's not get caught up in fancy words. Look at this double negativity here. It's just a way of poking fun at us humans who were 9 times out of 10 raised to think we have to make things complicated. That complication will keep us safe. It really doesn't. This holds true for the outer and the inner. Whatever we notice, whatever we see, whatever we perceive with our eyes, ears, tongue, flesh, and nose, or whatever we experience as emotion, intention, thought, memory, or imagination. Emptiness is not empty. It abides in the dimension of emptiness. Awareness arises from the nature of the open space. So there's a huge difference between concentration and noticing. So once again, we're going to return to, that's the word I was looking for, visual aid. Sturgeon's Law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, and while 10% of us think it's splendid to be flexible, loving, rational, laid-back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, kind, the vast majority of us were raised to believe that it is far superior to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. I've been involved in 2 cults in my life. One considered it a self-Christian, one considered it a self-Buddhist, and although the metaphysics were quite different, their behavior was identical. So these people who were raised to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, and the like will implore their students to over-focus and over-analyzing. The consequence of that is that it exhausts the prefrontal cortex, causing us to present with symptoms of depression, and triggers our amygdala, the seat of both anxiety and aggression. However, if we have the good fortune to receive instructions to instead rely upon the sympathetic and parasympathetic aspects of our autonomic nervous system, and instead of actively concentrating to simply notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, life is much better. Simply by cooperating with our autonomic nervous system, we calm our amygdala, we calm its anxiety and aggression, and we gently stimulate the anterior cingulate gyrus, which functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy, the root of both compassion and love. That's pretty cool. So we are reminded by the root text. And by the way, the more we cooperate passively with our autonomic nervous system by silently and mentally reciting the demonstrative pronoun this each time we feel air enter our nostrils, and by silently and mentally reciting the one-syllable verb ease each time we feel air exit our nostrils. When we make this our go-to function, then we are able to use our prefrontal cortex in the most sustainable way. When we make the prefrontal cortex the center of operations, we become miserable. When we make it just one of many tools at the disposal of our autonomic nervous system, our genius is activated. Awareness arises from the nature of open space. Without even wishing for it, one attains the bliss that is already free of any activity. The more we play with mindfulness and meditation, the more we cooperate passively with the autonomic nervous system that the ancients referred to as our Buddha nature, the more our choices and our utterances and our deeds flow from centered spontaneity. They flow lovingly and blissfully. Now that is extremely important right now, living as we are. 1 second here, I think I made a boo-boo. Let's see. One, two, three, four, five. Wrong button. Let's go over here. shift. Shift. Okay. So I live in North America, specifically in the United States of America, and there is a rise of fascism going on right now. It's been doing a slow creep for a very long time, but right now it's just sprinting. And it's terrifying. And as we watch our brown neighbors being brutalized, as we watch the Constitution being trampled upon, as we watch the cruelest and the stupidest seize power, it can be very easy for our empathy to trigger some very rash choices in us. And in the name of kindness, we can be just as cruel as other folks, and that will not end well. Good old Lao Tzu, about a century before the advent of the Buddha, taught that the three treasures of the Tao are simplicity, patience, and compassion. That the key to being happy is not only being empathetic, but also being accepting. Now, they might seem like two different things. What, I'm supposed to accept that people are being brutalized and thrown into prison camps? The same mindfulness meditation that nurture our empathy as we breathe in is the same mindfulness and meditation that nurture our letting go as we breathe out. And by practicing that, we set space for our choices and utterances, and deeds to flow, not from scatteredness, not from contrivance, but from the middle place of centered spontaneity. So think of it as like the 3 points of a tripod. When because we are accepting, our empathy flows from centered spontaneity, then it can do the most good. Simply being driven mad by so-called righteous violence will 9 times out of 10 give license to those who are looking for an excuse to crank it up to 11, to crank up the authoritarianism to 11. But that doesn't mean we do nothing. It means our wisdom, it comes not from cleverness, but from centered spontaneity. Now, this might sound like airy-fairy malarkey, but some of the greatest scientists have relied upon creativity. To borrow a line delivered by a tough guy actor whose name I forgot from the movie 15 Minutes, we cannot come back to a problem unless we first walk away from it. Einstein said, creativity is intelligence at play. When you look at the biographies of some of the greatest Nobel laureates, they were smart individuals. They used the front of their brain, but when they hit a metaphoric brick wall, they knew to step back, give the brain and the body a chance to regroup and rest. And then when they were doing something else, a connection would be made and come to them. And so they did something else. They recreated, they rested, they made love, they ate, they saw a movie, they rode a bike, not because they didn't care, but because they knew there were limitations to what they could gut out. And when they reached those limitations, they had to find indirect ways of accessing their wisdom. Every great thinker, regardless of culture, language, or gender, has agreed that creativity, forgive my mispronunciation, that creativity enters into the mix. And so we do not meditate we do not rely on ritual or visualization or channels Windsor drops or mantras to invoke a real or imagined entity, to throw lightning bolts at the tushies of the foolish fascists, although that would be terribly cool. We use different tools and tricks to optimize our own central nervous systems to heighten their effectiveness. We don't need any faith to cooperate with our autonomic nervous system. We don't need any belief. We don't need any magic. All we need to do is learn how to best inhabit these bodies we were born into. Infants are spazzy little delights, are they not? They lie on their back, making all sorts of noises and soil themselves. They're pretty helpless. We are wired in childhood to play, to physically play, to play with our bodies, to play with communication, to play with emotions, to play with ideas, to play the villain, to play the hero, to play the victim, to play all the roles. This is not random. We see this as a universal thing. The more complex an organism is, the more their juveniles play. Play is a way to inhabit the outer bodies and our inner nervous systems and endocrine systems. Mindfulness and meditation, when practiced authentically, are a way as adults we're able to cooperate with the various facets of our central nervous system in a way that can help us to rise to the occasion, not just in a courageous way, but in a beneficial way. Some people are all about grand gestures. Those say a lot about them. A grand gesture is often a way of saying, hey, look at me, look how awesome I am. Whereas doing the right thing in the best way, the more that weighs heavy on our heart, the more we really are moving, not from self-importance, but from love, but from empathy. William Shakespeare, in his play Hamlet, made fun of this. And he said, oh, what a work is man, how like a god in his indecision. And of course, that was a terrible paraphrase. I apologize. The idea is, so often doing the right thing in the right way can be abused as an excuse for doing nothing. What's the workaround? How do we avoid that? Simple. If we spend at least 5 minutes or so once every 12 hours, authentically training in mindfulness and meditation, we are clearing the board and giving our brain a chance to guide us to access the tool of centered spontaneity that will free up our choices and our communication and our behavior, that will optimize those things. Any good coach knows that in addition to training hard and eating right, rest is imperative, not just to prevent injury, but to increase skill and strength and speed. Sitting in mindfulness and meditation is that necessary time where we give space for our body and brain to process all the horrible things we've seen and heard and thought as we see the monster of fascism storm Tokyo like Godzilla in a black and white movie from the late 50s or early 60s. Having completed this morning's opening lesson, it's time for us to shift gears. It is Luke Skywalker Friday morning. Come, let us meditate like a Jedi after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is the Dzogchen Semde Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School for more than 30 years. I've harnessed my autistic special interests as well as my ADHD hyperfocus to spend about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each school of meditation so that I can become your personal, nerdy, neurodivergent guide to nirvana. Welcome, my friends, to meditate like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. For the remainder of this morning's live stream, let's play with the latest iteration of very easy meditation practice text, or sadhana, if you're nasty. So let us silently and mentally play with these two words in harmony with our breathing as we sit as sustainably as we can. The moment you have a specific question about Buddhist philosophy or meditation, do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window. For I tend to check for questions approximately every 13 minutes or so. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 10.5 hours, I would very much like to return to Leith Day's evening meditation class as well as group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.